There is a voice that sounds like gravel dragged across the inside of a coffin. A voice that doesn't so much speak as scrape its way into your ears and settle there like dust. And every single time it opens its mouth, the temperature in the room seems to drop a few degrees. You feel it before you hear it. A kind of pressure behind the eyes, a wrongness that runs along the back of your neck and reminds some ancient part of your brain that there are things in this world that existed long before you, long before anything you would recognize as life, long before light itself bothered to show up. That voice belongs to the Lich. And tonight, we are going to sit with him for a while. So get comfortable. Pull whatever blanket you have a little closer. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw unclench. We are going to go somewhere very old and very dark together. And we are going to follow the full arc of one of the most genuinely unsettling characters in animated television history. From before the universe itself, to the crumbling end of all things, and somehow, impossibly, to the small, quiet life of a child named Sweet Pea, who just wants gold stars on a refrigerator. This is the entire story of the Lich, and there is nowhere to rush. Hey, before we get deep into this, drop a comment and let me know what time it is where you are, and where in the world you're watching from. There is something genuinely wonderful about knowing someone in a different time zone, maybe already in their morning or in the middle of a sleepless night, is sitting with this alongside you. And if you're new here, hit subscribe and settle in. We do this a lot. Part 1, Before There Was Nothing, There Were Monsters. Let's start at the beginning. Except the beginning of the Lich's story isn't really a beginning at all, at least not in the way we normally understand that word. When we say something has a beginning, we mean it started somewhere, at some point in time, with some cause preceding it. There was something before, and then this thing appeared after. But the Lich doesn't quite work that way, and the show makes that unsettlingly clear in one of the most chilling moments in its entire run. In the episode called Gold Stars, when the Lich briefly surfaces through Sweet Pea's body, there is a monologue. It is quiet, measured. It doesn't shout or threaten or posture. It just speaks, the way a fact speaks. And what it says is this: before there was time, before there was anything at all, before there was even nothing, there were monsters. And the Lich is one of them. Let that breathe for a moment. Before nothing. Not before something. Before the concept of emptiness itself. The Lich is claiming to predate the conditions under which absence can even exist. And the show, to its credit, doesn't frame this as an exaggeration or a boast or villain dialogue delivered for effect. It frames it as probably true, because everything we learn about the Lich across Adventure Time's entire run seems to circle back to this idea that whatever this thing is, it operates on a scale so far outside the ordinary that categories like born and created and died don't quite apply to it. This is worth sitting with, because Adventure Time is a children's show. Or rather, it was sold as one, aired on Cartoon Network, and is full of colorful characters with cute faces and a setting that looks like a candy-colored fever dream. And then you get to the Lich, and the show very quietly shifts registers and starts asking questions that philosophers have been wrestling with for centuries. What does it mean for something to exist before existence? If something is older than time, is there any meaningful sense in which it can be destroyed? Can you kill what death itself is modeled after? The mythology the show builds around the Lich draws on some very old ideas about evil. In a lot of traditions, evil isn't understood as a thing that got created by some other thing at some point in time. It's understood as a fundamental quality of reality, something intrinsic, something that exists alongside good as its necessary counterpart. The dark that gives light meaning. The ending that makes moments precious. Adventure Time takes this idea and runs with it in a direction that is genuinely strange, suggesting that the Lich isn't a villain in the traditional sense, not someone who chose to be evil, not someone whose circumstances made them destructive. He is a force. He is the personification of a drive toward extinction so ancient and so fundamental that even the universe organized itself around accommodating it. And the universe's tool for this, it turns out, is the catalyst comet. Every 1,000 years, a comet of enormous power strikes the Earth, and when it does, it carries with it an agent of change. Adventure Time calls these catalyst comets. Each one carries a specific kind of energy, a quality, a purpose. Some of them carry good. One of them carries Finn the human's soul, his entire lineage of heroism compressed into a streak of light falling through the sky. Others carry chaos, or change, or transformation. And one of them, millions of years before the events of the show, before the Mushroom War, before before any of the kingdoms or characters or stories that Adventure Time would eventually tell, one of them carried pure evil. The comet was green. That's the color of the Lich. That sickly, luminous, organic green. The color of decay and radiation. And the particular shade of wrong that comes when life turns against itself. And the comet had horns, not actual horns made of rock, but the flames trailing behind it shaped themselves into horn-like structures, unmistakable if you knew what you were looking at. The same silhouette that would one day belong to the most feared entity in the land of Oo. But that was still millions of years away. When this comet hit Earth, it didn't create Oo. It wiped out what came before it. The mass extinction event that ended the age of dinosaurs, the one that left the Earth quiet and empty, and covered in dust, and rearranged everything that came after, that happened 66 million years ago. And the science is real. Something enormous hit the Earth and changed the conditions of life so dramatically that most of it stopped. But in Adventure Time, the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction wasn't just a rock. It was a soul. It was an intention. A primordial will toward ending things. Choosing the most spectacular platform it could find for its first curtain call on Earth, wearing a comet like a costume and hitting the planet with the weight of 66 million years of accumulated purpose. And then it waited. Because the Lich's essence didn't become the Lich we know at that point. The show suggests that whatever energy he is exists in a semi-dormant state embedded in the Earth itself, waiting for the right conditions to fully manifest. He is patient in a way that only something truly ancient can be patient. Because when your sense of time operates on a scale of millions of years, waiting is just another word for existing. He doesn't get bored. He doesn't grow frustrated. He doesn't need to. He has always been here, and he will always be here. And the specific moment at which his full form emerges is something he can afford to let the world determine for him. What he's waiting for, though he may not consciously know this in the way we understand knowing things, is humanity. Or more precisely, he's waiting for humanity to develop enough to destroy itself in exactly the right way. This is one of the most quietly horrifying things about the Lich's origin story, when you let it sit long enough to fully register. He doesn't just show up as a disaster. He shows up as the consequence of a disaster that humans created for themselves. His birth on Earth, his physical instantiation in the world, comes directly from what the show calls the mushroom bomb, a nuclear device detonated during an apocalyptic war that transformed the world into what Oo would eventually become. The Lich didn't invade. He waited for us to create the exact conditions his essence needed to take form, and then he stepped into the body we'd accidentally built for him. He didn't bring the apocalypse. He is what the apocalypse becomes when it's been composting in the Earth for 66 million years, and finally gets the conditions it needs to bloom. That is a deeply uncomfortable thing for a cartoon character to be. And the discomfort is very much intentional. Pendleton Ward and the Adventure Time creative team were working in a tradition of post-apocalyptic storytelling that reaches back through decades of science fiction, through the fears that characterize the Cold War era, through the particular anxiety that comes from knowing that human beings have, at various points in history, built weapons specifically designed to end the world. The Mushroom War in Adventure Time is clearly coded as a nuclear conflict. The landscape of Oo is full of rusted cars and old highways, and the skeletal remains of shopping malls and cities, the bones of our civilization poking through the candy-colored flesh of this new world. And the Lich is what you get when you imagine what nuclear energy, nuclear fear, nuclear destruction fully realizes itself as a person. He's the shape of that particular human-made catastrophe, given a skeleton and a voice. Ron Perlman, who voices the Lich throughout the show's run, was originally a suggestion that changed who the character was. Pendleton Ward had initially wanted to cast Tom Waits, whose voice occupies a similar register of deep, worn, slightly otherworldly gravitas. But when the show eventually cast Ron Perlman, It got something specific. Perlman has this quality in his voice of ancient patience, like someone who has seen everything and is mildly disappointed that you're only showing him something he saw 10,000 years ago. He doesn't perform menace, he just speaks. And menace is one of the things that comes out because it lives in the architecture of his voice already. He is the narrator of the Fallout video games. For reference, games set in exactly the kind of post-nuclear wasteland that Adventure Time's backstory is gesturing toward. That's a very specific aesthetic choice about what apocalyptic evil sounds like. So before we even get to the Lich walking around and doing things, before we get to his plans and his possessions and his wishes and his defeats, we have already established something important. This is not a villain who wants power or revenge or control. He doesn't want a kingdom or an army or to be worshipped. He is not motivated by wounded pride or traumatic backstory or a twisted version of a good quality taken to an extreme. He is the incarnation of a singular drive so ancient it predates the universe. And that drive is the extinction of all life, every living thing, everywhere, always. Not because he benefits from it, not because he enjoys it in the way a sadist might enjoy cruelty, but because that is what he is. He is the ending that existence keeps having to postpone, and he takes that deferral personally. Or perhaps he doesn't take it personally at all, which is in some ways even more unsettling. One of the recurring things that makes the Lich so effective as an antagonist is that he is neither cruel nor indifferent in the way those words normally function. He is purposeful. He moves through the world the way a glacier moves. Not with anger, not with malice in the personal sense, just with an absolute, uncomplicated inevitability. The fish die when he crosses the lake not because he wants them to. They die because death is what he is. And being near him is being near a fundamental force of the universe. You don't get mad at a glacier, but you do get out of its way. There is one more piece to the Lich's origin that layers in something fascinating, and it comes from much later in the show, from an episode called Casper and Nova in the Fiona and Cake spin-off series. It's revealed there that the Lich thinks of himself as the last scholar of Gulb, a being who in Adventure Time represents primordial chaos, the formless entropy that existed before the ordered universe took shape. The Lich dedicated himself to Gulb. He believed that by extinguishing all life, by fulfilling his role as the embodiment of the ending, he was serving his god, honoring the chaos that preceded creation by returning everything to it. There is something almost religiously coherent about this, in a deeply terrible way. He has a theology. He has a purpose within a cosmic framework. The universe, for the Lich, is just a very long detour that has been taking too much time to end. Gulb is worth pausing on here, because understanding the Lich's relationship to Gulb is essential to understanding the tragedy that runs beneath all of his apparent victories. Gulb is depicted in Adventure Time as a colossal entity of pure chaos and formlessness, something that doesn't think in terms that any conscious being could follow or predict. It isn't evil in a morally meaningful sense. It doesn't want anything in the way that creatures with wants understand wanting. Gulb simply is, the way entropy simply is, the way the dissolution of ordered systems is simply a physical fact. It doesn't have a plan. It doesn't have a preference. It doesn't have an opinion about whether the universe should contain life or not, because having opinions would require the kind of stable, organized consciousness that is itself a form of order, and Gulb is the principle that makes order eventually impossible. The Lich devoted himself to this. He looked at the most fundamental force of dissolution and disorder in the universe and said, "That is my God. I will be its instrument. I will do in the physical world what it does at the level of deep structure. I will end the argument that life keeps making against entropy, once and for all, in every corner of every reality. And when I have done this, my God will know that I have served it well." The problem, which the Extinct World storyline makes devastatingly clear, is that Gulb is not capable of knowing anything, recognizing anything, rewarding anything. Dedicating yourself to Gulb is like dedicating yourself to the concept of falling. Falling doesn't notice your devotion. Falling doesn't care. It just falls, and if you jump in front of it, it takes you with it. And if it wants to, it turns you into a Tetris block. Not as punishment or recognition or any conscious act, but simply because that is what chaos does with the orderly things that enter its domain. The Lich built an entire purpose, an entire identity, an entire existence spanning timescales that dwarf the history of human civilization, on the assumption that chaos would see him. That disorder had a hierarchy, and he was near the top of it. That being the instrument of the end would earn him a place in whatever follows the end. And none of that was true. He was not a scholar of Gulb. He was debris in Gulb's current, mistaking his direction for intention. That is, when you sit with it, an extraordinary amount of pathos to build into the show's central villain. Not sympathy exactly. The Lich wants everyone dead, and we should be clear-eyed about that. But there is something in the shape of his tragedy that resonates with a particular human experience. The experience of organizing your entire life around a purpose that turns out not to see you. The experience of dedicating yourself so completely to something that doesn't reciprocate, that when the dedication is finally completed, there is nothing left. The hollow victory, the empty achievement, the success that should have felt like everything and felt, instead, like exactly nothing at all. And somewhere underneath all of that ancient darkness and cosmic purpose, deep in the fossilized bones of the planet, waiting for 66 million years, in the radioactive residue of a war, nobody won. The Lich waited to be born. Part 2, The Green Fire and What It Touched. The Great Mushroom War. Even the name has a quality of myth to it. The kind of name that gets given to events only once enough time has passed, that the people who remember them are gone. And what remains is just the word and the shape of the wound. Adventure Time never shows us the Mushroom War in its full detail. We see fragments of it, glimpses in flashbacks, artifacts in the landscape, implications in the way the world of Ooh is constructed. But we understand enough to know what it was. It was the end of human civilization, at least as we'd recognize it, of the world as it had been, of most things that had learned to call themselves alive. The bomb itself, the mushroom bomb, is the pivot point, not just for the world's history, but for the Lich's. It detonated, and when it didn't just destroy in the usual way that explosions destroy things. It released something. The show never explains the precise mechanism, but the visual language is unmistakable. When the bomb goes off, the cloud it produces is green. That same sickly luminescent green that we associate with the Lich. The same color as his fire. The same color as his eyes when they're lit from inside. The Lich is in that cloud. Or rather, the energy that the Lich has been slowly accumulating since the comet impact millions of years ago is in that radioactive dispersal. The bomb is, in some sense, the Lich hatching. The show's lore suggests that someone, or something, fell into the mutagenic waste released by the mushroom bomb. A person, submerged in that radioactive green soup, who became the body that the Lich's ancient essence poured itself into and took as its own. The person who was there before the possession is gone, completely replaced by whatever the Lich is, wearing that body the way you'd wear a coat. The Lich has no memory of being human. No trace of humanity survives. He is using a body of approximately human proportion, a massive skeletal figure with horns and a broken crown and robes, and the particular hollow dignity of a dead king who refuses to stop moving. But whatever was inside it before he arrived was used up, erased, replaced without remainder. What the Lich does after acquiring this form is not immediately clear from the show's timeline. He isn't born fully active, immediately terrorizing the post-apocalyptic landscape. The world is, after all, in chaos. Most things are dead, or dying, or mutating in strange directions. The survivors are scattered and terrified. Whatever kingdoms and communities and structures would eventually coalesce into the land of Ooh are centuries away from being anything recognizable. The Lich exists in this period as a kind of background radiation, an existential threat that isn't quite focused yet, whose power is real, but whose direction isn't fully established. At some point during this long post-apocalyptic period, the Lich builds something. His lair. Adventure Time shows us this space in the episode Mortal Folly. And what we see is an old subway tunnel, not a magical dungeon, not some hellish otherworldly domain, but a ruined subway station underneath what was once a city. The mundanity of it is part of what makes it unsettling. You can still see the bones of the old world, the tiles, the structural arches, the shape of platforms that people once stood on waiting for trains. And inside this space, the Lich has created the Well of Power. The Well of Power is a pool of glowing green liquid, and it is exactly what the bomb's residue has become over centuries of concentrated energy. It looks like nuclear waste, because, in a sense, it is nuclear waste. But it's nuclear waste that has been turned into something intentional, something focused, a power source that the Lich can drink from to amplify his already considerable abilities. The well is described in the show as the Lich converting the planet's life force into unholy power, which tracks with everything else we know about him. He is not an outside invader turning life into something other. He is life's own capacity for ending itself, and his power comes from that energy turned inward. This is also when the Lich begins to operate more actively in the world. He isn't just existing in a ruin, he is gathering strength and beginning to move toward his goal. And that's when the first attempt to stop him happens. We know about Billy before we know about the Lich. In the narrative structure of Adventure Time, Billy is introduced in the first season episode, his hero. And he is established through a gloriously over-the-top theme song sung by creatures in the land of Oo about his greatest achievements. Billy the hero who built the Crystal Mountain, who kissed a warrior woman, who slept for 100 years. And in that song there is a line about how Billy cast the Lich King down. The Lich's original name, incidentally, was the Lich King, a title that was changed before the show aired, because that exact name belonged to a major antagonist in the massively popular World of Warcraft game, and the show's producers didn't want to invite legal complications. So the king got dropped, and just the Lich remained, which is arguably an improvement because it sounds even more like a statement of fundamental nature. Billy's confrontation with the Lich is shown to us in fragments. We see a flashback in Mortal Folly, where Billy, enormous and heroic and magnificent, goes up against the Lich when the Lich was at the height of his power and in the full glory of his original form. At that point, the Lich has 2 intact horns, which is a detail that matters because throughout the present-day story of Adventure Time, one of his horns is broken, a remnant of Billy's assault on him. The image of it is almost operatic, this titanic struggle between the greatest hero the world of Oo has ever known and the incarnation of extinction itself, fought somewhere in the ruins of the old world, with the stakes being nothing less than whether any form of life in this post-apocalyptic landscape would get the chance to rebuild. Billy wins, after a fashion. He doesn't kill the Lich, because the Lich cannot be killed in any conventional sense. Destroying his body doesn't end him. It just forces him into a spirit state from which he can possess new hosts. What Billy does is trap him. The amber of a specific tree, a massive ancient tree that would eventually become the foundation of the Candy Kingdom, is apparently the right substance to hold the Lich in. There is something fitting about that. To organic matter, living matter, a tree that has grown over centuries on the post-apocalyptic Earth, its slow, patient life used as the lock for a prison that the most powerful entity in the world couldn't break on his own. Life as the cage for death, the living wood of the earth saying, "Not yet, not today. You will wait here." How Billy managed it is not fully shown, but what we know is that it required Billy being at the height of his powers, moving with the specific strength and confidence of a hero who believed completely in what he was doing. Billy's whole character in Adventure Time, even after we learn that the Billy we've been seeing in the present day was the Lich in disguise, is rooted in this. He was the greatest hero the world of Oo had ever known, and he went up against the greatest evil, and he came out with the evil locked in a tree. That is not a small achievement. That is not something that can be dismissed even knowing how the story eventually turns. Billy fought the Lich and contained him. And for what appears to be hundreds of years after that, the Lich stayed contained. What did it cost Billy? The show is quiet on this. We know that at some point between the Great Battle and the show's present day, Billy gave up being a hero. He became a recluse, retreating to a cave, no longer willing to go on adventures or help people. Finn idolizes him and then eventually meets him and has to process the gap between the legend and the worn, disengaged man who has stopped trying. The usual reading of Billy's retirement is that he was simply exhausted, that even heroes burn out, that seeing too much and fighting too hard can hollow you out. This is probably true. But there's something to the idea that fighting the Lich specifically might have done particular damage. You don't look directly at the embodiment of all endings without that changing you in some way. Even if you win. And Billy won, which is more than most things managed. The Lich waits. He does not sleep, or at least not in the way living things sleep, as a necessary biological rhythm. He exists in his amber prison the way a fire exists in a jar without oxygen present, potential, awaiting conditions that will let it breathe again. He is aware, or something like aware. He can reach out with his mind, feebly at first, then with growing precision, as the decades and centuries of confinement give him nothing to do but practice the subtlest, most focused form of his power. He cannot manifest physically, he cannot speak aloud, but he can whisper. He can touch the minds of small things. While the Lich is imprisoned, the world moves on. The land of Oo takes shape across centuries of weird, radioactive evolution and candy science and magic that nobody fully understands anymore. Ice King freezes in his madness over the Arctic. Marceline wanders the landscape for centuries, learning what it means to survive. All the kingdoms establish themselves, fight each other, negotiate with each other, build their strange and complicated lives in the ruins of what the Mushroom War left behind. Heroes come and go, adventures happen. And below the Candy Kingdom, in a prison of amber inside an ancient tree, the Lich turns his will toward escape with the patience of something that measured its existence in geological time. The tree is not silent. Princess Bubblegum mentions in Mortal Folly that the Lich has been casting spells in his imprisonment, reaching out with his mind, looking for a crack in the seal, a weakness in the binding, something he can use. He can't break out on his own, not while the amber holds him and the tree's living wood reinforces it. But he doesn't need to break out. He just needs one small opening, one small creature that he can reach. He finds it in a snail. The waving snail is one of Adventure Time's great background jokes. A running gag embedded so deeply in the show's DNA that the production team managed to hide it in almost every episode, a tiny snail visible somewhere in the frame, always waving at the camera. It's a Where's Waldo situation for attentive fans, and for the first 2 seasons, it's just a charming Easter egg, the kind of detail that makes rewatching the show a small pleasure. And then, Mortal Folly happens. And the joke becomes something else entirely. Because the snail that's been waving at you from the background of every episode, the Lich has been controlling it for who knows how long. The cheerful little wave isn't the snail being friendly. It's the Lich, wearing the snail, looking at you through the screen. The implications of this, if you're inclined to think about them, are considerable. The Lich can reach outside his prison with his mind. He can take control of small creatures. And he has been doing this quietly in the background the whole time, maybe just practicing, maybe actually working a specific plan, maybe both. He is not waiting passively. He is waiting actively, which is a much more frightening thing. In Mortal Folly, the snail now fully under the Lich's control crawls out of Finn's backpack at precisely the right moment. Princess Bubblegum has brought Finn and Jake to see the Amber Prison, to show them what they're dealing with, to give them context for the protective gems she wants them to wear. And while she's explaining the situation, explaining the exact nature of the threat that's been locked up under their feet, the snail makes a tiny crack in the amber. That is all it takes. The Lich is free. This is the shape of how the Lich operates, and it's worth paying attention to because it tells you something important about what makes him effective as an antagonist. He doesn't come in through the front door. He doesn't announce himself and demand a battle. He works through the smallest available aperture, the lowest form of life he can reach, the tiniest crack in any defense. He is patient and oblique, and he uses his enemy's own circumstances against them. Finn and Jake came to the prison to understand the Lich better. The Lich used that visit to escape. He turned their education into his liberation, without doing a single thing overtly threatening. Once he's out, though, the obliqueness drops. He blasts out of the Candy Kingdom and makes for his well of power, which he needs to restore his full strength. And this is the battle that establishes what the Lich actually is in combat. Why Billy defeating him was such an extraordinary achievement. Why Finn and Jake are genuinely outmatched fighting him with anything they would normally consider a weapon. Billy's gauntlet is supposed to be the thing that can hurt the Lich. It's described as the one weapon that can harm him, and Princess Bubblegum hands it to Finn with the gravity of someone giving someone else the only key to the only lock on the only door that matters. Finn charges in with it, and the Lich catches Billy's gauntlet in his bare hand and reduces it to dust, just touches it and it falls apart. One of his horns is broken. He has no eyes, just the green fire burning from empty sockets. He is not full strength, he hasn't reached the well yet. He does this anyway. What defeats him, in the end, isn't the weapon made for him. It's a sweater. Princess Bubblegum knitted Finn a sweater because she cares about him, telling him it would keep him warm in the Lich's cold lair. It's not a good sweater, by her own admission. It's a little frilly and not particularly well made. It's a gift made with love by someone who wanted Finn to have something from her while he was facing something terrible. And when Finn pulls that sweater tight through the Lich's eye sockets and uses it to rip the top of his skull off and collapse his entire body into dust, what defeats the physical manifestation of everything ending, what stops the ancient incarnation of extinction in his tracks, is something made by someone who loves someone else. A token of affection defeating an entity of annihilation. Adventure Time couldn't resist that, and honestly, neither can we. But the body crumpling to dust doesn't mean the Lich is gone. It never means that. It just means he needs a new host. Part 3. The Castle of Amber. The Possessed Queen. The body is dust, but the Lich's spirit is something that doesn't know how to end. That's rather the point of him. The spirit is still in the room when Finn and Jake think they've won. And when the Ice King, who has been a gleefully absurd obstacle throughout this entire sequence of events, demanding blessings for a wedding that no one wants, and generally making a difficult situation more difficult, accidentally drops Princess Bubblegum into the well of power. The Lich's spirit has exactly what it needs. This is the moment that mortal recoil centers on. And it is one of the genuinely uncomfortable stretches of Adventure Time's early run. Princess Bubblegum, possessed by the Lich. She doesn't announce it, she doesn't transform visibly. Not right away. She just comes back from the well wrong. Her skin has gone pallid, a gray-pink shade that is off enough to notice if you're looking, but easy to explain away as shock, as injury, as the reasonable physical response to falling into a pit of radioactive, magical ooze. She requests specific items, things like gasoline and lighter fluid and bleach and plutonium. She frames them as medical necessities. Finn, trusting and 13 years old, and deeply in love with her in the uncomplicated way of being that age, goes and gets them without asking why a princess recovering from an accident needs plutonium. What she's building, when she mixes all of these ingredients in her bathtub and drinks them, is a replacement for the Well of Power. The original well is back in the ruined subway under Iceberg Lake and she can't get to it anymore. But she has a chemistry lab and a young man who will fetch her anything. And the Lich inside her is improvising. She drinks the mixture. She transforms. Whatever candy biological form Princess Bubblegum normally occupies gets stretched and distorted by the Lich's presence into something towering and monstrous. The princess's face elongated and wrong, her eyes dark and purposeful with that particular green light, her body an instrument for a goal that has nothing to do with her. The fight that follows is strange, because Finn can't fully commit to fighting her. He knows it isn't really her, in a sense, but she also is her. Her body, her voice, the face he cares about more than he wants to admit, and the Lich is wearing all of that with contemptuous efficiency. Ice King, of all people, becomes a crucial ally here, not because he's brave or wise or particularly useful in conventional terms, but because the solution requires freezing the possessed bubblegum solid, and that's something he can actually do. The ice shatters the body's connection to the Lich. The Lich retreats. Princess Bubblegum survives. But only barely. The Candy Kingdom doctors have to work with what tissue they can save. And there isn't enough candy biomass left to reconstruct her fully, so she wakes up as a 13-year-old. Biologically de-aged by the catastrophe. Younger than Finn now, briefly, before a later episode's events restore her. The de-aging of Bubblegum is one of those details that passes quickly in the show, but resonates with the kind of thematic weight the show often hides in plain sight. The Lich used her body, and the consequence of the Lich's occupation was that she came back smaller, younger, reduced. Not permanently, but for a while. There is something worth sitting with there about what it costs to be a vessel for something that destructive, even temporarily, even in a body that survived. She came back and she was changed. She was younger, which in the show's context means less experience, less formed candy biomass, less of everything that made her powerful. The Lich diminished her just by being in her. Not out of malice toward her, specifically she was just a body he needed, but the damage was real, regardless. And the Lich, expelled from Bubblegum, goes back to the snail. The snail that's been appearing in every episode, the one that waves at the camera. In the closing moments of Mortal Recoil, there is a close-up on the snail sitting on a windowsill. Its eyes are dark and sunken and filled with that familiar green glow, and it waves. Slowly, deliberately, and it's looking at you directly as the episode ends. This is the quiet threat. The Lich doesn't need a dramatic exit. He doesn't need a body that can speak or cast spells or intimidate anyone. He just needs a small host, something unnoticed, something that can move through the world without raising alarm. He settles in, and the waving snail keeps appearing in episode after episode, a reminder that he is still here, still patient, still working on the problem of his existence. What the show does during seasons 3 and 4 with the snail subplot is structurally interesting because it rewards attentive watching without demanding it. If you're watching casually, the snail is still just the snail. The little background gag, easy to miss or not think about too deeply. But if you notice it, and if you know what's in there now, every appearance of the snail becomes a quiet anxiety. He's there when Finn and Jake are having their adventures. He's there in the Candy Kingdom scenes. He's there during birthday parties and contests and quiet evenings at home. The Lich is always in the frame, never far away. Patient as ancient rock. In the episode, In Your Footsteps, the possessed snail is given something important. A bear, who has been befriending Finn and Jake under circumstances that seem innocent and sweet on the surface, gives the snail the Enchiridion. The Book of Heroes, an ancient text of considerable magical significance that, as will become extremely relevant shortly, has a secret beyond its obvious content. The Lich has been working toward acquiring it for a very long time, and he has done so entirely through the manipulation of people who were, each individually, acting on impulses that looked completely reasonable and kind. A bear befriending children. An act of apparent generosity. The Lich working through layers of indirection so that by the time he has what he wants, nobody who helped him get it knew they were helping him at all. This is his genius, if that's the word for it. The Lich doesn't need to fight his way to his goals. He works through the gaps in people's attention, through their trust, through their blind spots. He is patient enough to let situations develop naturally, and then slip through whatever opening they create. He is not impatient. He is never impatient. Whatever the opposite of impatience is when it exists on a scale of millions of years, that's what the Lich has. And then, between seasons 3 and 4, sometime in that interim that we don't see, something terrible happens to Billy. Part 4. The Lich wears Billy's skin. By the time we get to the 4th season's finale, also simply called The Lich, the Lich has freed himself from the snail and has done something that is described by the show as wearing Billy's dead body. Prismo will later refer to him as a ghost wearing a dead guy, which is chilling in its offhandedness. The way one entity speaking about another can make something horrifying sound like a minor observation. What happened to Billy is implied rather than shown, at least at first. We can infer that the Lich encountered the legendary hero at some point, killed him, and then occupied his remains. This is not the first time the Lich has possessed a body. He possessed Princess Bubblegum and the snail before this. But there's something particularly deliberate about choosing Billy. Billy is the one who defeated him, the one who cast him down and locked him in amber. And the Lich is now wearing his face, speaking in his voice, walking around in the skin of the only being in the world who had ever genuinely stopped him. If this reads as deeply personal, it might be. The Lich is not supposed to be capable of personal feelings the way we understand them. But choosing Billy's body suggests, at minimum, a sophisticated understanding of symbolism and utility. Billy is known to Finn and Jake, trusted by them, revered by them. Billy is the hero whose achievements Finn measures himself against, whose path he wants to follow. If you need Finn to do something for you willingly, wearing Billy's face is the most efficient way to accomplish that. The plan that the Lich's Billy executes in the Season 4 finale is worth appreciating for its elegance. He approaches Finn and Jake, claiming that he has discovered the true purpose of the Enchiridion. Not just a book of hero lore, but something more significant, a device. All the gems from all the crowns of power in the land of Oo, fitted into the slots on the book's cover, create a portal to the multiverse. And Billy tells them they need to gather those gems from all the princesses to activate it, because only then can they throw the Lich through the portal and be rid of him forever. Finn and Jake do it. Of course they do. It's Billy asking. It's the right thing to do, it sounds logical, and the goal is explicitly to defeat their greatest enemy. They gather the gems with considerable effort, and some creative problem-solving, and some friction with Princess Bubblegum, who has never been in the habit of handing over the gems from her tiara without asking why. And when the gems are all in place and the Enchiridion is activated, it creates exactly what Billy said it would, a portal to the multiverse. The Lich's Billy thanks Finn for opening it, not mockingly, not with the satisfaction of someone who has bested an opponent, just simply, with the calm recognition that what needed to happen has happened. He steps through the portal, and when the Billy mask literally peels away to show the skull beneath, when the real face emerges from behind the borrowed one, there's a moment of recognition that runs cold. They were told, they set this up, they did everything he needed done, and the only moment when they understood they'd been used was the moment the door closed behind him. This moment is quietly devastating because of what it does to Finn specifically. His admiration for Billy has been a recurring theme since the first season. Billy is the ideal, the proof that being a human hero in the land of Oo is possible and meaningful and glorious. And the Lich used that admiration as the master key to everything Finn was protecting. He didn't fight Finn and Jake. He didn't need to. He wore the face of Finn's hero, and let Finn's love and trust do all the work for him. Jake manages to grab the Lich as they're both pulled through the portal, and the resulting tumble through the multiverse pulls both Finn and Jake with them. They end up in the time room, which is where we will spend considerable time in our next section. But first, the portal also shows us where they emerged from. In the final moments of the episode, the animation style abruptly changes. It goes flat and different, more pastel and naive looking, and we see a version of Finn sitting on a hillside with a version of Jake, who is just a regular dog. Farmworld Finn. The alternate timeline that doesn't yet know what's coming. The story that Finn's wish is about to create. But that story requires going through the time room first. Part 5, Prismo's room, and the wish that could end everything. The time room is not a place on any map, because it exists outside the concept of places. It sits at the center of time, which sounds poetic but is apparently geometrically accurate, a point at which all moments converge, and from which you can observe everything that has ever happened or will happen simultaneously. The walls are covered in screens, showing every moment of history playing out in parallel. The furniture is early 1980s bachelor pad with beanbag chairs and a general sense that whoever lives here has strong feelings about comfort and has spent a lot of time alone. There is a jar of pickles. The pickles are important, though not to this particular part of the story. The time room belongs to Prismo, the wish-granting entity who appears as a two-dimensional magenta figure and grants one wish per person per lifetime. He is, notably, the dream of an old man. His entire existence is the sleeping imagination of one ancient human, which makes him both cosmically powerful and profoundly fragile in a way that the Lich will exploit with devastating effectiveness later. But right now, in Finn the human and Jake the dog, Prismo is the host of a situation that is getting rapidly out of hand. Finn and Jake and the Lich have arrived in the time room together. The Lich has his wish ready. He has had his wish ready, arguably, since before the universe existed. It doesn't require careful deliberation or the weighing of options. It is simply the articulation of what he is, compressed into a sentence. And standing before Prismo, with the screen showing every moment of existence playing on every wall around them, he speaks it. I wish for the extinction of all life. 5 words. That is the sum total of everything the Lich has been working toward, since before there was nothing. Since the Cretaceous impact, since the Mushroom War, since the Amber Prison and the Snail, and Billy's borrowed face. 5 words that would end every conscious being, every beating heart, every thought and dream and breath and love and struggle across the entire universe. Prismo has to grant it, because that is the rule. And the rule is older than Prismo, and older than the time room, and possibly older than the universe itself. 1 wish per person. Any wish. no exceptions. There is a moment before Prismo grants the wish that is worth paying attention to. He looks at the Lich. He looks at him the way Prismo looks at everyone who comes to him with a wish, with the weary, professional sadness of someone who processes desire for a living and has seen what desire does to things. Prismo is, in his way, as lonely as the Lich, but for opposite reasons. The Lich is alone because he is destruction in a universe that doesn't want to be destroyed. Prismo is alone because he is connection in a room no one visits, love in a space no one lives in. Friendship extended again and again to people who are only there for what he can give them. And now he has to look at the single most nihilistic wish that has ever been made and grant it. He does, because that is what Prismo does. The rules are older than everything except possibly the Lich himself, and even the Wishmaster at the center of time doesn't get to decide which wishes are worth honoring. Prismo grants it. All life in the universe goes away. The screens go dark. The Lich stands in a universe that is finally, at last, properly empty. And then Finn, who arrived in the time room a few seconds before this happened, screams his own wish. I wish the Lich had never existed. Prismo interprets this wish, as wishes must be interpreted, and the result is the Farm World timeline, a reality in which the mushroom bomb never went off, because the conditions that created the Lich were prevented. No mushroom bomb means no Lich. But no mushroom bomb also means no ooh. The familiar world didn't happen. Simon Petrikov, in this timeline, used the Ice Crown to stop the bomb himself, sacrificing his sanity faster than he did in the main timeline and then eventually dying in the long ice age that followed. Life went on without the mutation, without the candy people and the magic and all the rest of it, and it developed differently. Farm World Finn is a farm boy with regular human parents. Jake is just a regular dog. The world is strange and post-apocalyptic, but different. Emptier of magic. Heavier with a specific kind of grief. What makes the Farm World arc particularly devastating is the window it gives us into what the world could have been without the Lich, and what it cost to get there. Simon Petrikov, in the main timeline, became the Ice King, slowly losing himself to the crown's madness across decades. It is one of the show's most genuinely tragic storylines. In Farm World, Simon used the crown once, fully, stopping a bomb with his whole self, and then eventually succumbed to the madness and presumably died in the ice age he created. Different tragedy. Same sacrifice. The world without the Lich is also a world where Simon didn't survive, just in a different way. And the Farm World children Finn and Jake are living without magic, without the adventuring life, without all the extraordinary things that come with being born into a post-apocalyptic world that had centuries to get weird in interesting ways. They are simpler and more normal, and in some ways less formed by the adversity that shaped the Finn we know. There is no guarantee that Farm World Finn is less good or less heroic, but he hasn't been tested the same way. He hasn't had the Lich to push against. This is the Farm World timeline telling us something true about the main timeline. The world of Ooh is what it is, in all its wonder and strangeness and beauty, partly because of the catastrophe that created it. You don't get to remove the disaster and keep what grew from the disaster. You remove the bomb, and you keep some things. You keep more humans. You keep a world that isn't full of candy people and floating rainicorns, but you lose other things. You lose the specific resilience and creativity and transformative weirdness of a civilization that built itself in the ruins of everything that came before. This is when the Lich demonstrates something about himself that is more disturbing than anything else he's done. He doesn't give up. He never gives up. The wish that unmade him, that tried to close the door on his existence before it began, didn't fully close it, because the being that the Lich is exists prior to the conditions that created his specific form. The soul is older than the mushroom bomb. The will toward extinction is older than the catalyst comet that brought it to Earth. So when the mushroom bomb is removed from history, the Lich doesn't simply cease, he looks for another opening. Farm World Finn, trying to reverse what Simon Petrikov sacrificed to prevent, accidentally detonates the mushroom bomb himself. The mutagenic waste spills out, and Farm World Jake, Finn's beloved, non-magical dog, falls into it. Farm World Jake becomes a Lich dog hybrid, a creature of enormous power and terrible purpose. The Lich's essence poured into the beloved body of Finn's best friend in this alternate reality. The thing that Finn trusted most, reanimated with the thing he feared most. And this Farm World version of the Lich doesn't just lurk or scheme. He immediately starts doing what the Lich always does, moving toward extinction with total focus, gathering power, advancing the mission. The solution to this particular crisis comes through Jake, the original Jake, in the time room. Jake is there with Prismo, because Finn is in Farm World. And these timelines are coexisting in a complicated way. And Jake makes a wish. The wish, characteristically and beautifully, is for a sandwich first, and then for the Lich's original wish to be retroactively altered so that the Lich accidentally wished to just send Finn and Jake home to Ooh. This is a brilliant and slightly absurd solution that works precisely because the Lich, for all his cosmic power, never anticipated that someone would try to alter the wish retroactively. He was thinking forward. Jake thought sideways. Farmworld doesn't cease to exist. It persists as an alternate timeline, which has consequences that will come back later. But the main timeline is preserved. Finn and Jake are home. The Lich, his wish corrupted, is left in Prismo's time room in a catatonic state, slouched in a beanbag chair at the center of time. Unable to act, unable to advance his purpose, unable to do anything but exist in the way a force does when it has nowhere to direct itself. He sits there. He waits. He is good at waiting. But Prismo makes a mistake. An understandable one, the kind that comes from basic human comfort with a threat that is currently inert at one point during a gathering at the time room, with various characters present. Prismo offhandedly mentions to Finn and Jake that he can be killed if the old man whose dream he is gets woken up. He doesn't say this as a secret. He says it as a conversational fact. The way you might mention a minor quirk about your living situation. The Lich is in the room. The Lich hears this, and the Lich begins moving. Part 6 Wake Up, The Price of Passage, and The Citadel. Wake Up is the opening of Adventure Time's 6th season, and it requires the audience to hold a particular emotional dissonance. Finn and Jake need to commit a cosmic crime in order to gain passage to the crystal. Citadel, the multiverse prison, because that's where Finn's birth father is being held. This is a significant storyline in its own right. Finn finally getting to meet the father who abandoned him. And the show handles it with real emotional weight. But the cosmic crime they need to commit, the one that will grant them access to the Citadel, is waking up the old man. Prismo's old man. The one who should never be woken up, because waking him up means Prismo ceases to exist. They wrestle with it. They genuinely wrestle with it. And the show doesn't make it easy by giving them an obvious justification. Prismo is their friend. He knows their names and watches movies with them and cares about them genuinely. Waking the old man up means ending Prismo, and they know that. But Finn's need to meet his father is profound, in a way that pulls against all of that. And in the end, Jake takes on the crime himself, going to the old man's room alone and prodding him awake. Prismo vanishes. The time room becomes an empty space with screens playing history to no one. And the Lich, who has been waiting in that room, now has his opening. He goes to the sleeping old man, and he kills him. He kills the old man, ensuring that Prismo can never come back, not through the old man choosing to sleep again, not through any trick or loophole. The Lich seals the exit. This is notable because it's the one moment in the series where the Lich's action is almost purely destructive. In a motivated way, he didn't need to kill the old man to achieve his larger goals. But he did it because it closed a door, because it removed a possibility, because the Lich understands that thoroughness is the difference between a setback and an ending. He then uses the portal to the Crystal Citadel, the multiverse prison where the worst criminals of existence are held, and he does there what he does anywhere he begins the process of ending things. The Citadel Guardians, enormous crystal beings whose blood has healing properties, try to stop him. He releases the prisoners. He wraps the entire structure in black fire. He is at his most cinematically powerful in these scenes, truly fearsome in the scope of his destructive capacity. A skeleton wreathed in green flame against the white crystalline architecture of the universe's highest security prison. There is something almost beautiful about the visual of it, in the way extreme destruction can be visually beautiful even when it is terrible. The Lich moving through the Crystal Citadel is the same green fire that we saw in the Mushroom Cloud over the Mushroom War. The same fire that killed fish just by crossing a lake, The same fire that turned Billy's gauntlet to dust, but here it is operating at its full scale, on a prison built to contain the worst things in the multiverse, and it is doing so without hesitation. He doesn't savor it. He doesn't monologue about it or explain himself or take any pleasure in the spectacle. He moves through the citadel the way fire moves through anything. Because that is what he is. The prisoners he releases include Finn's father, Martin Mertens, who has been imprisoned in the citadel for unnamed crimes, is freed in the chaos of the Lich's assault. And the conversation Finn has been waiting his whole life to have with the man who abandoned him turns out to be profoundly unsatisfying. Martin doesn't remember Finn properly. He calls him Flynn at one point. He is charming and completely hollow. Someone who used to be a good person by some accounts and has been diminished by his own history into someone who treats his son as an inconvenience. Finn loses his arm, pulling the platform Martin escapes on. The Lich freed the prisoners, and what Finn got from among those freed prisoners was the discovery that the father he'd been looking for wasn't waiting for him in there. The Lich didn't plan this, precisely. He didn't set out to break Finn's heart. He set out to turn the Citadel's infrastructure to rubble. But the results of his actions land on Finn in ways that go far beyond the physical damage, and the show is honest about that. The arm will eventually heal. In its complicated way, Finn grows a new grass arm, loses that, eventually grows a human arm again. The emotional wound from the father encounter will take longer and prove more complicated. The Lich's chaos isn't personal. It just isn't impersonal either, when the chaos has consequences that specific and that close. And then Finn, who has just gone through the most emotionally gutting interaction with his father who was neglectful and callous and didn't even remember his name, calling him Flynn, takes a vial of Citadel Guardian healing blood, and in a moment of wounded rage and desperate impulse, throws it at the Lich. The healing blood works on the Lich the way an immune system responds to a pathogen, the way rain works on ash. It fills in the gaps. It grows tissue. It creates. Life blooms over death, literally. Flesh growing over bone. Organs assembling themselves where none were before. The incarnation of extinction being forcibly rebuilt as a living body from the outside in. The Lich screams, not in the way a villain screams when defeated, but in something that sounds genuinely closer to horror. The fundamental wrongness of being made into a thing that breathes and grows and lives when you are the thing that does not. What falls to the ground when the process is complete is a giant baby. Enormous, still physically massive, because the Lich was massive, and the flesh grew over what was already there. Still has the horns, covered in new skin, but the eyes are wide and innocent and terrifyingly new. The mind inside has been, as Jake will later describe it, rebooted. Whatever the Lich was is still there, somewhere deep in the architecture of this new body, but it has been pushed so far down beneath new life that it is currently inaccessible. The baby looks around with enormous wondering eyes and says nothing, because it doesn't have words yet. It has only just been born. Finn and Jake leave the baby on Tree Trunks and Mr. Pig's doorstep. Tree Trunks, who has been contemplating the end of her marriage, opens the door, sees a giant baby left on her porch, and says something changes everything. She is right, though perhaps not in the way she's calculating. She and Mr. Pig adopt the baby immediately and name him Sweet Pig Trunks, or Sweet Pea for short. And the Lich, who has spent millions of years as the embodiment of extinction, begins his life over as someone's small child. Part 7: Sweet Pea and the Life That Doesn't Remember Dying. Sweet Pea is enormous. That's the first thing you notice about him. He towers over every other character in the land of Ooh, still carrying the scale of the body that used to house the most feared entity in the multiverse. But now that body belongs to a kid who wants gold stars on his homework and is nervous about his first day of school. The horns are still there under his skin, bumps on the top of his head, skin pulled tightly over what are still very much the horns of the Lich. He will always be carrying that underneath him, the way everyone carries something underneath them. He doesn't remember. This is the thing about Sweet Pea that the show handles with particular delicacy, or at least particular complexity. The baby that grew over the Lich's bones doesn't have access to the memories, or the purpose, or the ancient terrible drive that define the Lich. Sweet Pea is a new consciousness, assembled from scratch by the Guardian's blood, innocent in the most complete sense, not just behaviorally innocent, but cognitively, existentially so. He has nightmares sometimes. He wakes up screaming in the middle of the night, and when he's asked about it, he says he dreamed about monsters, and he can't quite describe them. He doesn't know the monsters or memories. He doesn't know they're his. Tree Trunks and Mr. Pig, to their credit and their gentle, slightly hapless charm, are loving parents. They are not particularly sharp parents, and there are moments where you want to gently suggest that perhaps the small child who periodically experiences power, surges and speaks in voices that predate the universe could use some closer supervision. But their love for Sweet Pea is real and uncomplicated, and provides something that the being who used to inhabit that body never had and perhaps never could have conceived of wanting: a home, a family, someone who puts gold stars on the fridge. The episode Gold Stars is where we see for the first time what happens when Sweet Pea's dormant lich nature is accessed under pressure. Sweet Pea goes to school, which is already a wonderful visual, an enormous supernatural child attending a perfectly ordinary classroom in the land of Ooh, a walking contradiction between the mundane and the cosmic. He is bullied, which is handled with enough specificity that it stings a little, the way bullying always does when you see it operating on a kid who doesn't understand why they're being targeted. He tries to do well, he helps people, he just wants the gold stars. He falls into the orbit of the King of Ooh and Toronto, two con artists who see in Sweet Pea an opportunity. They give him gold stars for performing tasks that benefit them, making him a kind of unknowing proxy for their schemes. And when he discovers their true motives and they threaten him and his family, something in the deep basement of Sweet Pea's mind stirs awake. Not fully, just enough. The voice that comes out of him in that moment is not Sweet Pea's. It is older than anything else in that scene, older than the school and the candy people and the land of Ooh, older than anything except possibly the darkness before time. It says that before there was nothing, there were monsters. It says, "Here is your gold star," and it breathes the black gas of oblivion. The King of Ooh and Toronto flee. Sweet Pea comes back to himself, confused and slightly embarrassed and unsure what just happened. His parents find him and are just happy he's okay. The gold stars go on the fridge. But the moment established something important, and the show returns to it later. The Lich is not gone. He is in there. He is just very, very quiet. And he is not passive. He is not passively dormant, not a threat that has simply been neutralized. He is waiting. Even in this form, even crushed down beneath the consciousness of a child who just wants to go to school and be loved, the Lich is still the Lich, still ancient, still patient, still absolutely certain, in whatever remains of his purposeful mind, that eventually the time will come again. The question the show asks through Sweet Pea is fascinating. Can what someone is be changed by what life they live? Is the Lich still the Lich if he's living as Sweet Pea, if he's growing up learning to be kind, if he's developing relationships and humor and the ability to feel hurt by cruelty? If every moment of his new life layers goodness over the bones of his old purpose, does the purpose survive? Can extinction be loved out of a person? Adventure Time suggests that the answer is yes, with an asterisk. The Lich survives in Sweet Pea, but it doesn't define him. Sweet Pea defines himself. One gold star and one nightmare, and one quiet morning eating enormous quantities of breakfast at a time. Part 8. The Hand from Farmworld. The Farmworld timeline, remember, didn't cease to exist after Jake's wish rerouted things. It kept going, persisting as an alternate branch of the multiverse, with its own Lich, the Farmworld Lich, who was Farmworld Jake before the mushroom bomb's waste transformed him. And as seasons progress in the main timeline, the story of what happened in Farmworld starts intersecting with the present in ways that have direct consequences. The episode Crossover is where this comes to a head. Finn, in the main Ooh timeline, encounters the Farmworld version of himself, Farmworld Finn, the farm boy who doesn't have the adventuring background or the emotional armor that main timeline Finn has developed over years of fighting and growing. And through a complicated multiverse intersection, Finn's grass sword arm meets the Farmworld Lich and severs the Lich's hand. The hand falls into the portal, connecting the timelines and lands in Ooh. This detail matters because a severed hand of the Lich is not a dead hand. The Lich's essence persists in fragments of him. The hand is still active, still sentient, still operating with the Lich's will and purpose. It doesn't just lie on the floor of the tree fort and stay there. It moves. It hides. And it seeks out the one place where the Lich's power is currently living in a dormant form. It seeks out Sweet Pea. This is where the episode Whispers takes us, and it is the culmination of Sweet Pea's arc with the Lich, in a way that is genuinely moving once you understand all the layers. Sweet Pea has been having bad dreams for a while, and in Whispers, we learn that the voice in those dreams, the voice that tells him he is terrible and that he belongs to destruction, and that the sweet life he's been living is a borrowed thing, a temporary interruption, is the Lich's hand, whispering to him at night, working on him the way the Lich worked on the snail in the amber prison, slowly and patiently, wearing down the resistance from the inside. Finn and Fern discover the hand and fight it, but the Lich's hand is more formidable than it looks, easily repelling them both. And here is where the show does something graceful and quiet. Sweet Pea, rather than being rescued from the Lich by Finn and Jake in the way they've tried to rescue everything for years, faces the Lich himself. He faces the voice. He faces the ancient terrible thing inside him that tells him he is nothing but death and ending and extinction. And he says, in the way that a child says important things simply, without performance, that he doesn't want to be that. He is Sweet Pea. He wants to be good. He knows there is darkness in him, and he is not pretending it isn't there, but he does not have to live for it. He picks up a sword. It is Finn's sword, small in his enormous hand, almost comically small, and he drives it into the Lich's hand, and the hand collapses, and the whispering stops. Finn tells Sweet Pea afterward that they have something in common: bad biological fathers and wonderful adoptive families. It is a specific, true thing to say, and it acknowledges something about Sweet Pea's situation that the show has been circling for a while. The Lich is not Sweet Pea's father, exactly. But the Lich is the darkness that preceded him, the terrifying original that his new self grew over. And Sweet Pea learned, in the best way anyone learns anything, that the inheritance you were given doesn't have to be the life you live. Finn calls this the 5th time he's fought the Lich. Mortal Folly and Mortal Recoil counted as one. The 4th season arc as another. The Citadel as a 3rd. The crossover events as a 4th, and this as the 5th. He says it matter-of-factly, with the weary familiarity of someone who has been having the same argument with the universe for years. The Lich responds that he knows Finn has bested him in many worlds, in many timelines, everywhere the pattern repeats. Finn counters that this still means the Lich has lost everywhere. The Lich says flatly that this is because Finn always fights back, but that this is a temporary condition. Finn is going to die. Everything is going to die. The Lich is simply older than impatience. They defeat him. Again, Sweet Pea doesn't go anywhere. He's still Sweet Pea, still enormous and kind and determined to go to school and earn gold stars. The Lich's influence recedes. The whispers stop. And Sweet Pea goes home to Tree Trunks and Mr. Pig, who are very glad to see him and who do not fully understand what just happened, but who understand that their son is okay, and that's the information that matters. Part 9, The Final Battle. The Spirit and the Giant. And what lives in the future? The finale of Adventure Time, Come Along With Me, brings most of the show's threads together in a conflict centered on Galb, the primordial chaos entity, appearing in physical form in the land of Oo. This is an enormous battle involving essentially all of the show's major characters, and it is not precisely a Lich episode. But the Lich is present in it in a specific way. Sweet Pea, in the chaos of the battle, protects his parents. He stands between the forces of Golb and the small, gentle creatures he has spent his new life loving. And he is massive and strong enough that this means something. The child of the Lich, the body that death built and life rebuilt, using the physical inheritance of the most feared entity in the multiverse's history to shield the gentlest possible people from the end of the world. This is perhaps the fullest expression of what Sweet Pea's arc has been, about not erasing the past, not pretending the darkness didn't happen, but making a life that turns what was terrifying into something protective. The opening sequence of the finale also shows us something. Shermie and Beth, 2 characters introduced as framing devices living 1,000 years after the events of the main show, are in the opening sequence riding on a large mountain. Except, it's not a mountain. Looking more carefully, it's Sweet Pea. Sweet Pea as an adult, 1,000 years in the future, now genuinely enormous, the size of a geographic feature, wandering the landscape of a future Ooh with an ancient sword on his back, and the long patience of something that has had a very long time to think. The spirit of the Lich is still in there, dormant in the show's final assessment. It never goes fully away. But Sweet Pea is not the Lich. He is something the Lich became on the way to becoming something entirely different. And in the 1,000-year future of Adventure Time, he is a landmark. He is the mountain. He is part of the landscape that children in this future will know and perhaps not fully understand, the way we know ancient geological formations without necessarily knowing what catastrophe created them. He is the ending that became a beginning that became, eventually, simply a fact of the world. There is something restful about that, actually. Something that resolves in a quiet and unexpected key. The Lich, the being who existed before nothing, who crossed 66 million years in a comet, and another 1,000 years in a radioactive skeleton, and a snail, and a hero's dead body, and a wish ends up as a very large, very old man-shaped mountain with a good sword, wandering somewhere warm. That's not defeat, that's transformation. And transformation, the show has always argued, is the only thing that ever truly defeats anything. Part 10. The Extinct World, and the God Who Didn't Answer. But we are not done. Because the Lich's story, as told across Adventure Time, does not end with Sweet Pea. The multiverse is larger than one timeline, and somewhere in its folds there is a version of events where things went differently. The Distant Lands spin-off series, and then the Fiona and Cake series, expand the Adventure Time universe in significant ways. And buried inside the Fiona and Cake show is one of the most quietly devastating examinations of the Lich that the franchise has ever produced. It takes place in what is called the Extinct World, a timeline where the Lich's wish came true. Remember the wish for the extinction of all life. In the main timeline, Jake's retroactive wish alteration prevented this from coming to pass. But timelines, in Adventure Time's cosmology, don't simply stop existing when they're superseded. They persist. And somewhere in the multiverse, this wish was granted fully and permanently and without interruption. Every living thing in that universe died instantly, reduced to skeletons in the space of a breath, leaving a landscape that looks like ooh but drained of every trace of vitality. The grass is dry, the air is still, the buildings stand but no one moves through them. The world is a museum of bones. The only one still moving, among things that were once organic, is BMO. BMO is not technically alive in the biological sense. BMO is a small game console that became sentient. A machine that thinks and feels and has adventures. And the Lich's wish apparently applied to organic life in a way that left mechanical intelligence intact. BMO wanders this empty world, maintaining something like hope that Finn and Jake will come home soon. Unable or unwilling to fully process that they are not coming. BMO has given names to things that cannot name themselves, including the figure that sits in the old subway station, atop a pile of bones, doing nothing. BMO calls him Jerry. Jerry is the Lich. He is sitting in his lair, in a more decomposed version of Billy's body, the flesh, still there but rotting further. One eye dangling loose from its socket. The remains of the clothes gone to rags, the body giving way slowly to the bones underneath it. He doesn't move. He doesn't speak. He doesn't respond to BMO's cheerful, slightly oblivious company with anything that looks like engagement. He is sitting in the world he made, and he is profoundly, exhaustingly, completely depressed. This is one of the most unexpected things Adventure Time ever does with the Lich, and it lands with the quiet impact of a revelation that changes how you read everything before it. The Lich achieved his goal. He got what he wanted. He wished for the extinction of all life, and it happened. Every living thing in his universe is gone. The last life ending has been executed. He has fulfilled his purpose. And Gold never answered. That is the heart of it. The Lich did everything in GOLB's name. He was the last scholar, the dedicated servant, the instrument of chaos rendered into cosmic form. He believed, if believing is a word that applies to something like the Lich, that achieving the extinction of all life would earn him something. Acknowledgement? Maybe. Purpose fulfilled? Certainly. Some sense of divine completion. The God saying, yes, you have honored me. This is what you were for. But Golb gave no sign, no signal, no answer of any kind. The universe emptied out and there was just silence. The Lich could not destroy himself. Whatever he is, he persists even when there is nothing left to persist among. He sits on his pile of bones in a dead world, and there is nothing for him to do, and no way to receive the recognition he expected. And BMO calls him Jerry, and he can't even make himself be offended by this because offended would require caring, and he has stopped caring about anything at all. When Simon and Fiona and Cake arrive in the extinct world looking for the Ice Crown, they encounter Jerry and are understandably terrified. The Lich disables them immediately. He is still functionally powerful even in his depressive state. Old habits. But he doesn't kill them. He notices that Simon is still alive, remarks that he would have killed the Ice Wizard 1,000 times in the old days, and then doesn't do it. He just observes. He lets Simon make his observation that the Lich has killed all life and ended up too depressed to function, and the Lich doesn't deny this. He doesn't argue. He just exists in the terrible fact of his own success. The moment that follows is strange and almost comic in its collision of scales. Simon performs a magic ritual and uses the Lich as a power source, essentially plugging into the most powerful evil entity in the multiverse, the way you'd plug into a wall socket, and the Lich permits it because he has nothing else to do and no reason to resist. The greatest villain in Adventure Time's history, reduced to a battery for someone else's plan. It is perhaps the most undignified moment the Lich has ever had, and the show plays it not for laughs exactly, but for the particular melancholy of seeing something that was once immense and terrible now just vacant, compliant, there because it's there, and not because it chose to be. Simon's interaction with the Lich in this sequence is brief, but contains one of the most insightful observations in the entire Fiona and Cake series. Simon looks at the Lich sitting on his pile of bones, recognizes the emptiness, and makes the diagnosis out loud. Killing all life made the Lich too depressed to function. There's no cruelty in the observation. Simon has been through enough of his own long darkness to recognize what prolonged purposelessness looks like on a person. Or an entity. He is not the Ice King anymore. He is himself again after years of confusion and grief, and he can see clearly. The Lich achieved his goal. The Lich has nothing left. There is a strange intimacy in Simon being the one to name this, because Simon Petrikov and the Lich have been mirror images in Adventure Time's mythology across seasons. Both of them were defined by something terrible that happened during or around the Mushroom War. Both of them spent centuries in a state that wasn't quite themselves, caught in an existence that their original natures never chose. Simon became the Ice King, trapped in madness by a crown that slowly erased him while keeping his body going. The Lich found his body and his purpose immediately but was then repeatedly defeated, contained, redirected. Both of them ancient, both of them worn, both of them in this moment standing in the ruins of a dead world, with a lot of history between them and nothing to do with it. Simon doesn't linger. He has his own task. Fiona and Cake have their own situation. The ritual gets done, and then the portal opens to Golb, and the Lich follows. When the Lich arrives in Golb's dimension, he does something he has never done in the main series. He tries to communicate. He addresses Golb with the posture of a worshipper, which is a visual we have never seen from him before. He bows. He tears away the remnants of Billy's skin, standing in his own bones, revealing himself completely. He shouts. He demands. He needs, in the most desperate and un-Lich-like way, to understand why his sacrifice, his achievement, the successful prosecution of the only purpose he had ever known, did not bring him closer to his God. What more was required? What he misunderstood? What he should have done differently? Golb transforms him into a floating T-block. A Tetris piece. Rectangular, solid, drifting. And the Lich is quiet. There is a detail worth noting about the other shapes floating in Golb's dimension. They are all geometric blocks, all similar. If the theory holds that they are other versions of the Lich from other timelines, where the same pattern repeated, other scholars of Golb, who achieved the extinction of all life and came to their God for recognition and got the same non-answer, then the Lich is not alone in his failure. He is one among many. An infinite parade of entities older than time, each one completing the same terrible mission in its own timeline. Each one arriving at the same god with the same question, each one receiving the same silence dressed as geometry. None of them learned from each other. How could they? They exist in parallel. They never met. Each one arrived at the end, convinced it was the only one, the faithful servant, the last scholar. And Golb, which doesn't distinguish between any of them because Golb doesn't distinguish between anything, added them all to the pile. That is the Lich's ending in the Fiona and Cake universe. That is as close to a true ending as he gets anywhere. Not defeat in battle, not the destruction of his body or the containment of his spirit. Just the moment when the structure his entire existence was built around turned out not to be a structure at all, when the faith was revealed as a misunderstanding. When the scholar discovered that the text he spent eternity studying was never addressed to him and was not, perhaps, addressed to anyone. A floating Tetris block in the chaos dimension. BMO's friend Jerry, rearranged. When the Lich arrives in Golb's dimension, he does something he has never done in the main series he tries to communicate. He addresses Golb with the posture of a worshipper, which is a visual we have never seen from him before. He bows. He tears away the remnants of Billy's skin, standing in his own bones, revealing himself completely. He shouts. He demands. He needs, in the most desperate and un-Lich-like way, to understand why his sacrifice, his achievement, the successful prosecution of the only purpose he had ever known, did not bring him closer to his God. What more was required? What he misunderstood? What he should have done differently? Golb transforms him into a floating T-block. A Tetris piece. Rectangular, solid, drifting. And the Lich is quiet. There is a detail worth noting about the other shapes floating in Golb's dimension. They are all geometric blocks, all similar. If the theory holds that they are other versions of the Lich from other timelines, where the same pattern repeated other scholars of Golb, who achieved the extinction of all life and came to their god for recognition and got the same non-answer, then the Lich is not alone in his failure. He is one among many. An infinite parade of entities older than time, each one completing the same terrible mission in its own timeline. Each one arriving at the same god with the same question, each one receiving the same silence dressed as geometry. None of them learned from each other. How could they? They exist in parallel. They never met. Each one arrived at the end, convinced it was the only one, the faithful servant, the last scholar. And Golb, which doesn't distinguish between any of them because Golb doesn't distinguish between anything, added them all to the pile. That is the Lich's ending in the Fiona and Cake universe. That is as close to a true ending as he gets anywhere. Not defeat in battle, not the destruction of his body or the containment of his spirit. Just the moment when the structure his entire existence was built around turned out not to be a structure at all, when the faith was revealed as a misunderstanding. When the scholar discovered that the text he spent eternity studying was never addressed to him and was not, perhaps, addressed to anyone. A floating Tetris block in the chaos dimension. BMO's friend Jerry, rearranged. Part 11, What the Lich Means and Why He Still Matters. It is worth sitting here for a moment before we move into the final section, because the Lich is such a specifically constructed character that the themes he carries deserve to be held for a moment without rushing toward conclusion. What the Lich represents, at his most essential, is entropy. Not entropy as a villainous motivation in the way that characters in certain kinds of stories want to unmake things for dramatic effect, but entropy as a fact. The second law of thermodynamics, dressed in a robe and given a voice. All ordered systems tend toward disorder. All complex arrangements of matter eventually simplify. Everything that is currently alive is currently in the process of dying, moving toward the state that the Lich embodies, and the only thing that prevents this from happening immediately is the continuous input of energy that life requires to maintain itself against the drift. Life is an argument against entropy that has to be made again every single day. Every breath is a vote. Every heartbeat is an assertion. The Lich doesn't need to win. He just needs to wait long enough for everything else to get tired of making the argument. This is what makes him a fundamentally different kind of villain from anything Adventure Time could have used as its main antagonist, and still been the show it became. Most villains in animated shows want something specific: power, vengeance. a specific object, control of a specific place. The hero can give them what they want in a controlled way, or deny them what they want and protect the thing in question, or turn the villains wanting against them. There is always a shape to the conflict, a specific negotiating point, a way to structure the resolution. The Lich doesn't want anything that can be reasoned with. You cannot give him a partial version of what he wants and satisfy him. You cannot protect one specific thing and leave him satisfied with everything else. He wants everything gone, and more than that, he doesn't even want it in a way that can be satisfied, because the moment everything is gone, he loses his reason for existing. The extinct world Lich proves this. He got what he wanted, and it made him more desolate than anything else could have. The wanting was the point, not the having. The pursuit was his form of existence, and existence without it was worse than any defeat. There is something almost compassionate about Sweet Pea's outcome when you consider it through this lens. The Lich was a being who existed to want the extinction of all life, and that wanting was the only form of purpose he had ever known. When that purpose was removed and replaced with nothing, he became the Tetris block, the depressed Jerry on a pile of bones. But Sweet Pea is the Lich's body and perhaps the Lich's energy given a different purpose, not extinction, not the ending of things, but the growing of things, the protection of things, the gradual accumulation of gold stars and kind moments and enormous breakfasts. Sweet Pea is what the Lich's energy looks like when it's pointed at living rather than dying. And the 1,000 years later image of Sweet Pea as a mountain-sized wanderer carrying a sword suggests that whatever the Lich was is still in there, still providing the strength and the scale and the endurance. What changed is the direction. The same immovable eternal patience that the Lich used to wait for extinction now apparently goes towards something else. Something we don't fully see, but which involves a sword and a wandering life. And the fact of being so old and large that you've become part of the landscape. That's not a bad transformation, for the embodiment of all endings. The other thing worth noting is the Lich's relationship to Finn specifically, which runs through the entire show as a kind of cosmic counterpart. Finn is the incarnation of the good catalyst comet, the one that represents heroism, the goodness that came into the world to push back against extinction. The Lich is the incarnation of the evil catalyst comet, the one that represented the drive toward endings, the darkness that has always been trying to undo what life keeps doing. They are, in a profound sense, created counterparts. Two aspects of the same cosmic machinery set up in opposition, because that's how the universe apparently works. This makes every time Finn defeats the Lich something more than a hero beating a villain. It's one half of a cosmic principle pushing back against the other, goodness refusing to stop making its argument, life refusing to accept the conclusion that entropy keeps proposing. And it makes the fact that it happens multiple times across multiple defeats and resurrections in alternate timelines more than repetition. It's the necessary structure of reality. The argument has to keep being made. The vote has to keep being cast. Finn beats the Lich 5 times across the main series, and every time is the same argument in a new form, the same refusal, the same insistence that this is not the ending yet. One of the things the show does quietly and well is track the shift in Finn's relationship to the Lich over time. In the early seasons, the Lich is terrifying to Finn, in the way that the unfamiliar and overwhelming is terrifying. He doesn't understand what he's dealing with. He fights on instinct and love and is almost defeated. By the time of Whispers, Finn tells the Lich to get ready to die for the 5th time, with the slightly tired air of someone addressing a recurring inconvenience. Not because he stopped taking it seriously, but because he has been fighting this specific thing for long enough that the terror has been replaced with something more sustainable, a clear-eyed understanding of what it is, and the settled willingness to face it again anyway. That's what heroism looks like when it's been worn in, actually. Not fearlessness, not the absence of understanding what you're dealing with, but the presence of understanding and the choice to face it anyway. Part 12, Ron Perlman and the Voice of Deep Time. We should give some time to the craft of it, because the Lich as a character would be significantly less effective without the specific performance that brings him to life, and that performance belongs to Ron Perlman. Perlman is an actor with an unusual register. He has a face and a voice that were built, apparently, for roles that require something other than ordinary human relatability. His breakthrough work in the Beauty and the Beast television series cast him as a human-beast hybrid who was gentle and literary and kind, which tells you something important about how his unusual physical presence can be redirected. Hellboy, probably his most iconic role, is a demon raised by a good father who becomes a hero, which is a thematic arc that has interesting resonances with the Lich's eventual transformation into Sweet Pea, if you want to draw that connection. In the Fallout games, he voiced the narrator, setting the tone for a world devastated by nuclear war, with exactly the kind of measured, ancient-sounding authority that the Lich would later require. When Perlman gives the Lich his voice, he does something specific. He doesn't perform menace. He doesn't growl or distort his voice into something theatrical and monster-like. He speaks with the patience of something very old describing facts. His diction is precise. His sentences are short. He doesn't use more words than necessary, because something that has been working toward a single goal for millions of years doesn't waste energy on elaboration. Every line the Lich speaks sounds like the most logical conclusion of the previous line, which creates a cumulative horror. You keep waiting for him to say something unreasonable, something that reveals a flaw in his thinking, a crack in the certainty, and it never comes. He is just right, by his own impeccable logic, all the way down. The contrast between Perlman's Lich voice and the relatively ordinary, conversational voices of the other characters is a significant part of why the Lich is effective in scenes with Finn and Jake. When Finn argues with him, Finn sounds like a 13-year-old trying to hold his ground, which is to his immense credit and which we root for completely. But the Lich just sounds like, not even like a villain arguing back. He sounds like geological time politely noting an observation. There is one speech in particular, from Gold Stars, that demonstrates this perfectly. The Lich, speaking through Sweet Pea, addresses the King of Ooh and Toronto, with a quiet that pulls all the air out of the scene. Before there was time, before there was anything, there was nothing, and before there was nothing, there were monsters. Then, here's your gold star. And then the black gas, the oblivion breath, and the King of Ooh falling over himself to escape. What Perlman does with that speech is let each sentence breathe. He doesn't rush the cosmic framing to get to the threat. He delivers the origin story and the threat at the same unhurried pace, because to the Lich, they are the same statement. What I am is the threat. There is no separation between the history and the danger. The fact that this speech is delivered by a large child in kindergarten clothes having a bad day at school, with gold stars on the refrigerator at home and parents who love him, makes it both more and less frightening depending on what part you focus on. More frightening because it suggests the Lich is always in there, always accessible, never fully gone. Less frightening because Sweet Pea immediately came back to himself and went back to being sweet, which means the Lich, even when summoned, was contained and dismissed. Sweet Pea is stronger than the thing inside him. Life is stronger than the ending that life carries. Part 13. Everything that made him scary and why it worked. Adventure Time's pitch document, written before the show went to series, included the Lich King as one of only a handful of characters described alongside the main six. And it said in all capitals, "The Lich King is not funny." This was not an accident or an overstatement. It was a creative principle, a decision about what the show was allowed to do with him. Every other antagonist in Adventure Time gets to be a little bit funny. Ice King is tragic but also ridiculous. Lemongrab is horrible but also squeaking. Even Hunson Abadir, Marceline's terrifying father who steals souls for a living, has a scene that plays his monstrousness for light comedy. The Lich does not get that. He never gets that. He is not funny. And the show maintains this even when everything around him is funny. Even in episodes where he is sitting catatonically in a beanbag chair at the center of time while his enemies eat sandwiches nearby. This is a discipline that makes him more effective than any special effect could. Horror comedy, the mode that Adventure Time regularly occupies, depends on the audience understanding which things are scary and which things are funny, and trusting that when the scary thing appears, the registers won't blur. The Lich's presence signals a gear shift. When he is present, things become genuinely threatening. Not just excitingly dangerous, not just adventurously risky, but actually, cosmically, no jokes threatening. The show earns this response from its audience by consistently honoring it. His design contributes to this too. He is not grotesque or chaotic in his appearance. He is formal, almost elegant, the robes of a very ancient king, the bearing of something that has never needed to perform its authority because its authority is intrinsic. His face is a skull, which is the most fundamental visual shorthand for death across almost every human culture on Earth. But it's a skull with a crown, with horns, with the particular gravity of something that was never human, even when it was wearing a human shape. He doesn't lurch. He moves with deliberate, unhurried purpose. He doesn't snarl or howl or roar. He speaks in measured, patient sentences that would be completely reasonable coming from a very old professor discussing mortality in the abstract. The green fire from his eyes and hands is a consistent visual element that connects him to the mushroom bomb, to the mutagenic waste, to the destructive capacity of human technology turned against itself. It is the color of contamination, and it moves beautifully, burning slowly rather than explosively, patient even in its destruction. When things he touches decay, they don't explode or shatter. They crumble. They go soft. They return to the basic components that life organized, and that non-life is always patiently waiting to reorganize. He doesn't destroy things so much as remove whatever was keeping them alive. His broken horn is a detail that matters in a quiet way. He began, in the flashbacks to Billy's battle, with 2 intact horns. After the fight, one is broken. He doesn't grow it back. Through all his reincarnations and possessions and reconstitutions, the broken horn persists, and it persists on Sweet Pea 2, covered in baby flesh, a bump on the top of the child's head, where the damaged horn still sits underneath. This continuity of imperfection connects all the forms he takes. The Lich is not pristine. The greatest evil in the universe has a broken horn because a hero once hit him hard enough to break it, and he has carried that mark ever since. There is something almost respectful about the show's consistency. On this point, it acknowledges that being hurt is real, that damage persists, that even the incarnation of extinction can be marked by history. The one scene where the Lich's composure breaks completely is in GOLB's dimension, in Fiona and Cake. Demanding answers from Golb. That breakdown, that moment where the ancient patient terrible thing comes apart at the seams demanding to know why its sacrifice wasn't enough, is so effective, precisely because we've never seen anything crack the surface before. It is a long story told in multiple seasons and multiple shows, and it ends there, in the dimension of a chaos god, a skeleton screaming into void. What does it mean to be dedicated completely to a purpose that the being you're dedicated to cannot acknowledge? What does it mean to serve something that isn't even looking at you? Adventure Time never answers this. It leaves the Lich floating as a Tetris block, and it leaves us to decide what we want to make of that. Some might find it satisfying he got what he deserved. Final defeat by the being he worshipped who didn't care about him. Some might find it sad a creature older than the universe, finally confronting the futility of its own existence. Some might find it absurdist, which is also valid. The most terrifying villain in the show turned into a floating block because chaos doesn't explain itself. All of those readings are in the episode. The show is comfortable holding all of them at once, because Adventure Time was never interested in simple resolutions. It was interested in what it means to be alive in a world that contains both immense beauty and immense darkness. And the Lich was always the darkness that the beauty has to keep arguing against. He is still there, in Sweet Pea, still quiet, still patient, still waiting for 1,000 years in the body of a very large, very old man who wanders the landscape and carries an ancient sword, and was once named Jerry by a small computer who was lonely and tried to be friendly. Part 14. The Legacy, the Fear, and the Shape of All Endings. Let's come back down for a little while. Come back to the specific, close, human scale of what the Lich represents, as a character in a show that was also about a boy and his dog, going on adventures and making friends and growing up. Finn is 12 when he first encounters the Lich as a meaningful threat. He is 13 inches mortal folly and mortal recoil. He is 15 by the time of the season 4 finale. He continues to age in a show that mostly keeps its characters stable, and by the finale he is several years older, and has lost an arm and grown a new one, and had relationships and confronted the meaninglessness of the father. He built a story around and learned to live with uncertainty. He has changed enormously, and through all of that change, the Lich has been a constant. There is something about having a persistent, unchanging adversary that functions differently for a child protagonist than it would for an adult. The Lich is the thing that was there when Finn was just beginning to understand what courage actually requires. The thing that showed him that the world contains dangers that can't be charmed or outsmarted or befriended, that some things just want all of this to end and mean it without reservation. That's a specific lesson. It's not a comfortable one. But knowing it exists makes everything else more valuable. Because here is the thing about the Lich's presence in Finn's life, and in the show itself. Everything precious in Adventure Time is precious, partly because the Lich is there. The friendships and the small kindnesses and the silly adventures and the love that people carry for each other, all of it is lit from underneath by the knowledge of what wants to snuff it out. Finn's relationship with Jake is beautiful on its own terms. It's also beautiful because there is a thing in the world that wants both of them gone, that doesn't distinguish between them and everything else when it makes its wish, that would reduce them to the same skeletal remains as everything else if it got its way. They keep getting up and going on adventures, not in spite of the Lich, but in a world where the Lich exists, and that's different. Sweet Pea is the distillation of this principle. He is the Lich transformed. He is what happens when the ending is given a new beginning, when the thing that wanted everything gone is given instead everything to live for. He is enormous and gentle and funny and a little nervous about school and deeply loved by imperfect parents who found him on their doorstep and said this changes everything. He is, in a sense, the universe's answer to the Lich, not a defeat, not a destruction, but a transformation so complete that the instrument of ending becomes a body for growing. Death literally wearing the face of a child who wants to be good. The Lich's name was changed before the show aired from Lich King to just the Lich, and the dropping of the king is significant. A king implies a domain, subjects, something to rule over. A king is still embedded in the structures of life. He needs living things to be king of. The Lich doesn't need that. The Lich has no kingdom he's trying to build or defend. He has no subjects he's trying to rule. He has a direction. He has a purpose. He has the single most focused and ancient drive in the history of existence, stripped of every other quality, pointing at one destination. He is the cleanest kind of villain the show could construct. No ambiguity, no trauma to address, no wound to heal that would change his course. Just the ending, given a voice and a body and a broken horn and an extraordinary actor saying every line like it was always going to be said. The show treats him with a respect that matches his nature. The Lich is never reduced to a comedy villain. He is never given a moment where he trips over his own cape or is outsmarted in a way that makes him look stupid. When he loses to things that genuinely have the power to affect him: the sweater made with love, the healing blood of the guardian, Sweet Pea's choice to be good, the indifference of the god he served. These are real forces. They are not tricks. The show is saying that life, affection, healing, and the simple decision to choose goodness over destruction are genuinely more powerful than entropy. Not because they always win immediately, but because they can keep going. The Lich can wait, but so can love. Love is also ancient. Love is also patient. Love also predates the specific arrangements of matter we're currently inhabiting. And when you put it that way, the Lich was never going to win. Not in a universe where a boy and his dog want to help people, and a princess makes a sweater because she's worried about someone she cares about, and a small computer names the destroyer of worlds Jerry, and tries to be friendly to it, across an uncrossable distance. The Lich was never going to win, because the universe that contains him also contains the impulse to make someone a sweater, and that impulse is just as old, just as fundamental, just as impossible to fully extinguish. He lost before nothing. He will lose after everything. The sweater wins. It always wins. Closing before nothing and after everything. So here we are, at the end of the Lich's story, or as near the end as we can get with something that floats as a Tetris block in Golb's dimension, while its body wanders the future as a mountain-sized, gentle giant. The Lich's story doesn't end clean, and Adventure Time was never going to let it end clean, because clean endings are not what the show is about. The show is about transformation and continuity, and the way things change while also staying themselves. The way every ending contains the seeds of something new. The way the most terrifying things are sometimes also the most sad. The Lich is the saddest character in Adventure Time. When you look at his whole arc, he is older than the universe. He worked toward a single purpose across geological timescales. He served a being who couldn't acknowledge him. He achieved his goal in one timeline and found nothing waiting on the other side of it. He was remade as a child who doesn't know him and can't fully become him, and is, if anything, the proof that his essential nature has been redirected rather than destroyed. He is the ending that keeps becoming something else, the extinction that keeps turning into sweet pea, the silence that keeps being interrupted by life saying, not yet, not yet, not yet. If that sounds restful, I mean it to. Because sitting with the full arc of the Lich is ultimately sitting with the full arc of what it means to face the darkness and keep choosing to be alive anyway. Every time Finn got up after being knocked down, every time a character in Adventure Time chose connection over fear, kindness over cruelty, laughter in the face of something very old and very cold and very certain about how this all ends. The Lich doesn't make those moments smaller. He makes them visible. He is the contrast that lets you see the light. The shape of the Lich's story is one that we don't often get in children's animation, or really in any kind of mainstream storytelling. Most stories about evil end with the evil defeated and the world restored to a prior state of goodness, or at least to a new stable equilibrium. The Lich doesn't get defeated in that way. He gets transformed, redirected, contained, reborn, but the specific quality that makes him terrifying, the ancient drive toward ending, that doesn't go away. It's still in Sweet Pea. It will be in Sweet Pea in 1,000 years when he's a mountain. The darkness doesn't leave. It becomes part of the landscape. What the show suggests, through this, is that the right response to darkness isn't to defeat it once and expect it to stay gone. The right response is to keep choosing the opposite of it, over and over, indefinitely, with the same ancient patience that the darkness itself possesses. The Lich waits. But so does goodness. Finn fights the Lich 5 times. He will fight him again, if the pattern demands it. Sweet Pea wakes up from nightmares and goes to school anyway. Tree Trunks puts gold stars on the fridge, not knowing what they're stuck to, only knowing that her child worked hard and deserves to feel seen. That is the answer to the Lich that Adventure Time arrives at. Not a magical sword, or a legendary gauntlet, or a cosmic power. A sweater made with love. A wish that sounds simple, and actually is simple. A child born from death choosing to live. The ordinary acts of care and attention, and showing up for people, done every day, with the same commitment that the darkness brings to its own endless patience. The Lich has been present since before the universe existed. He'll be present after Sweet Pea has wandered the future landscape for 10,000 more years. He'll be present in every timeline where the same cosmic machinery keeps grinding. He is as permanent as entropy and as old as the will towards silence that predates sound. But so is the impulse to make noise. So is the stubborn, beautiful, impossible insistence of life on continuing. So is the making of sweaters. So is the gold stars on the fridge. And as long as someone, somewhere is doing those things, the Lich hasn't won. He hasn't won. And somewhere in the warm dark of 1,000-year future, an enormous gentle man with an ancient sword and the slowed-down patience of something that has been walking for a very long time moves through a landscape that knows his name, that calls him Sweet Pea, that sees in his enormous familiar shape not the ghost of extinction, but the presence of something that has been living long enough to become part of the earth itself. Moving toward whatever comes next. Not rushing, never rushing, as patient as the darkness, as persistent as the light, closing before nothing and after everything. So here we are, at the end of the Lich's story, or as near the end as the story allows us to get. The screens in the time room are still playing every moment of every timeline. Somewhere in Gulb's dimension, a Tetris block drifts. Somewhere in the future of Ooh, a mountain that used to be a baby, that used to be a skeleton, that used to be a bomb, that used to be a comet, follows the horizon with no particular urgency. It is very late, or very early, wherever you are. The screen is probably the brightest thing in the room. Something outside is quiet, or has gone quiet. Your breathing has slowed down just a little over the last several hours. Your body has been doing what bodies do when a voice tells them a long story in a low register, settling, loosening, letting the immediate concerns drift off toward the edges, where they can't quite reach you. The Lich is patient. He always was. Patience is the fundamental attribute of something that measures its existence in timescales too large for us to fully conceive. He waited 66 million years in the earth, and then more centuries in amber, and then more in a snail, and then more in a beanbag chair at the center of time. He has never not been able to wait. But sleep is also patient. Sleep has been with human beings since before they were human, before they had words, or fire, or the ability to worry about the kinds of things we worry about. Sleep is older than almost everything we know, and it knows how to wait at the edge of your consciousness for the right moment, which is usually the moment when the story running in your head gets long enough and quiet enough that the body says, "This is close enough to dreaming. Let me take it from here." The Lich is patient, but so is sleep. And right now, in this specific moment, in whatever room you're in and whatever position you've settled into, sleep is winning. Let it. The land of Ooh will still be there. Finn and Jake will still be there. Sweet Pea will still be there, enormous and gentle, wandering through a future that has room for everything he became. The Lich will still be there too, as he has always been there, as he will always be there but held, contained, outweighed by love and sweaters and gold stars and the quiet determination of everyone who keeps choosing to be alive one more day. That's enough. That's always been enough. Before there was time, before there was anything, there was nothing. And before there was nothing, there were monsters. But after the monsters, there was morning. There was someone waking up and deciding to be kind today. There was a hero building a treehouse with his dog. There was a princess worrying about someone she loved. There was a small elephant taping a child's school drawing to the fridge. There was a giant wandering the landscape with a sword and nowhere in particular to be, and the wandering was enough, and the landscape knew his name, and the name was Sweet Pea. After the monsters, there was morning. Sleep well. If you made it all the way here, thank you. This one was long, and I hope it kept you company. Hit the like button if this helped you drift. Subscribe if you want more long dark stories told slowly. And drop a comment with the time and your location. I genuinely read them all. And there is something I love about knowing where all of you are in the world when you find these. Sleep well, wherever you are. I'll see you in the next one. Script for Dozing Off Time YouTube channel Adventure Time, ASMR lore series. A final note: the Lich in context. One last thing before we let it all go quiet. The Lich exists in a specific tradition of animated storytelling that Adventure Time helped define. The tradition of treating children's entertainment as a legitimate vehicle for genuinely complex ideas. The show aired on Cartoon Network alongside programming that was perfectly good and light and fun, and it was also those things. But it was carrying something heavier in its back pocket. The Lich was the heaviest of those things. He was the show making good on an implicit promise that the world it was depicting was real in a meaningful way, that the stakes were actual, that the darkness wasn't decorative. When the Lich first appears in his hero, as a briefly seen figure in Billy's highlight reel of greatest achievements, he is there as a statement about what kind of show this is. Most cartoons keep their darkness implied. Adventure Time showed it to you in a quick flash, and then let you think about it. And then Mortal Folly aired, and the implied became explicit, and a show about a boy and his dog had suddenly produced one of the most genuinely frightening antagonists in animated television history, not because of jump scares or graphic imagery, but because of what it was saying about what the Lich represents. Entropy is not a villain you can defeat with a clever plan or a discovered weakness. Entropy doesn't have a weakness. It has patience and probability and the absolute certainty that eventually the conditions for continued existence will fail. What you can do against entropy is exactly what Adventure Time's characters do: keep going. Keep making sweaters and friendships and gold stars. Keep choosing the argument even when the argument is hard. Keep defeating the Lich the 5th time with the same commitment you brought to the 1st time, because the 5th time matters just as much. That is what a show about a child hero learning what heroism actually requires eventually arrived at. Not that heroes win, not that good defeats evil in some permanent cosmic sense, but that the choice to be good, made again and again in the face of something that has been patiently opposing it for longer than the universe has existed, is the only thing that keeps the lights on. Finn learned that from the Lich more than from anything else. He didn't learn it because the Lich taught him. He learned it by fighting the Lich repeatedly. By finding new things to believe in each time the last strategy failed. By getting knocked down and getting up and getting knocked down again and getting up again. By reaching a place where he could say to the oldest evil in the multiverse, with the particular ease of someone who has been having this argument for years, get ready to die for the 5th time. And meaning it, not because he was certain he would win, but because not trying was not an option. That is the gift the Lich gave Finn without intending to. The gift of a worthy opponent, an unmovable darkness, something real enough to push against that pushing back, feels like it matters. We are all, in various ways, pushing against something like this. Something ancient and patient, and certain of the outcome. The trick that Adventure Time teaches, through Finn and through Sweet Pea and through everyone who kept choosing connection over despair, is that you don't have to be certain of the outcome either. You just have to push. The Lich waits, and every time something keeps going, every time a person wakes up and tries again, every heartbeat is a vote, every laugh is a small act of defiance, every gold star on the fridge is a reminder that the ending hasn't happened yet. And while it hasn't happened yet, it can be postponed indefinitely by the people willing to insist on it. Before there was nothing, there were monsters. But there were also heroes, and there were also their dogs, and there were also the people who made them sweaters because they were worried and wanted them to be warm. The sweater wins. It always wins. Now rest.